All right, we're going to be doing Stormlight criticism. I'm sure everyone will react in a very mature and respectful way to this video. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and not quite what I would have expected to be doing related to Stormlight with Wind and Truth just out, but we're going to talk about, as I see it, the problem with Stormlight and why I do think it is going to get worse. Now, a few things I want to say before getting started here is, A, I'm going to talk about my opinions. And I, as someone who's been reading Sanderson for literally 15 years, probably slightly over 15 years. I've read almost everything that he's ever published. I've read all of the Stormlight books except for Rhythm of War more than once, a lot more than once for Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. Read them all at release, reread them before each one as well. So I've read a lot of Sanderson. Many of his books I've read multiple times, and I've read, like I said, pretty much everything. I have read everything Cosmere. I also was somebody who wasn't super low on the secret projects either. I didn't love all of them, but I did like all of them, even Frugal Wizard. So I'm not here like out to get Sanderson or anything. Not like it would matter because I'm me and he's him. But I feel like I'm pretty qualified to talk about what I've seen as changes in Stormlight and why I think it's an issue and go from there. So the second thing I'm going to note is it's okay if you disagree with me, and you can absolutely tell me in the comments if you want. Don't be a dick, I guess, was what I would say there. And also remember that if you disagree with everything and you absolutely loved this, that's okay. I'm happy for you. I wish I could say the same thing with this book. It's not for me, but I'm really happy if you enjoyed it. That's completely okay. This is going to be me talking about the other side of the coin. And I know probably nothing I'm saying here is entirely new necessarily, but I think it's something that for me I've been kind of thinking about for a while. I've never really done a video or talked about it, and with starting Wind and Truth, I feel like it is more than truth. So with those notes, let's talk about it. So the big thing I think, when I say the problem with Stormlight, I think really there are some different pieces here. Ultimately, what we're going to be focusing on is how it's changed, and there are definitely multiple parts here, and there are other things I know people have talked about as well. So one of the first big things that I'll mention, because I know a lot of people have talked about, is how Cosmere aware you need to be in order to read Stormlight, because it's increased a lot, and it's something that I rightly predicted. I will say that Wind and Truth was really going to go full bore Cosmere, because it sounds like we're going to see in the back half of Stormlight even more Cosmere stuff than that. But it started with, there were some kind of things, there were very subtle things throughout, and there were things getting a little bit more obvious in Oathbringer, and then some really obvious things in Rhythm of War as we go along. In the prologue of Wind and Truth, we are going full Cosmere, name-dropping things, talking about a lot of different stuff, as kind of to be expected. And I know this has been something that a lot of people have been concerned about, because some people just really like this series and they don't want to have to follow the whole Cosmere. So I think that's something to be aware of. That's probably something that was always going to happen as well as things expanded. So I think that's it's one of those things that for me personally, that's not really where the core of my issue is, but I think it's something to be aware of. But on that kind of note, again, it's things that are changing from where we started with Way of Kings to where we are now. One of the big things that I will mention is that the kind of core feel and premise of what Stormlight Archive is also has changed a bit, because in The Way of Kings, we're introduced to this just grand epic fantasy, and that's the big thing. It's an epic fantasy. We're really focused on that. We look so much about the world. Sanderson set up this world that's completely alien from anything that we know, and that was a really big part of what it was. Now, I'm a huge epic fantasy fan. I love epic fantasy, and it's my bread and butter, and world building very specifically is a big thing for me. So when reading Way of Kings, and seeing that all of the different pieces of the world, where it's just every little thing is different. There's really not stuff that is the same, and that was kind of the design. And for me, that was a big draw. Now, of course, the characters are also a big draw for a lot of people as well. And that's always been true. The reason that I love Way of Kings as much as I do and still do is Kaladin and his arc. And that's the character I latched onto the most. So that's why Way of Kings has been and always will be my favorite. But so that's a big thing. And as we've gone along, we've stayed with that. But I feel like it started to become a little bit clearer
in Rhythm of War, and then in the start of Wind and Truth, and from everything I've heard about it, because I should specify here, so, and you can get mad at me if you will, I DNF'd this book. I did not get super far. I got, maybe 80 pages in, and then I put it down because I was not enjoying it. But I've talked to a lot of people about it as well who had both good and bad experiences, and like I said, my thoughts are kind of as a whole, so I will just mention that to get that out there. So if you just want to be like, you didn't finish it, your opinions are invalid, okay, that's fine. But anyway, so with how this started, and things we started to see a little bit more in Rhythm of War, I would say as well, is we've really shifted. This isn't so much the epic fantasy where the world and this backdrop and this big thing is the focus. This has become more and more really, really focused on the characters and their introspection. And that is very different from what we saw in the beginning. It's to the extent that, like, the start of this book, and something that was in a lot of the sample chapters too, is we're starting many chapters with these big, long internal monologues where it's really the character going in, and it's still written in third person, but it's a very different feel from anything that you got, especially in the early books, because it's very much this internal monologue. It's this introspection. It's this analyzation, and we're really over explaining and getting in there. Now, this is also the thing I know many people have noted, that especially in Rhythm of War, you could really see the focus on mental health, and it just was to the point where it was really in your face and not really subtle, not necessarily being done in like even an interesting way. It's just like in your face with it. And I mean, that's something that also seems to have continued in the parts of Wind and Truth that I read and from what I've heard about as well. And I think part of that is, again, we're really changing what the focus is here. And you see this as well, even early on, with kind of what we're focusing on with characters as well. And I think this bridges into the other thing that we're going to talk about. But I think part of it is people have really latched onto a lot of characters, and then you're starting to get more characters where it feels like they're being designed to make people relate to them, and we're seeing different types of characters pop in, but it's just really the feel of it is it's a different focus. We're more and more seeing things that are related to our world, that are terms from our world, things like that. It feels more like this is just a really, really character-focused story that's fantasy, but that it's not this big epic on its own kind of grand thing, because it's related a little bit too much to our world. The other thing I will then get into, which I sort of, was leading into here, is the way that it's being written. And now, Wind and Truth, even early on, I was a bit surprised because the writing, like I said, is different, but also like things like language in here. There are some actual curse words in here that are not in-world curse words, which is something that Sanderson has never put in any of his books, and so that's something that's very different. And also, it's just little bits of the writing seem like they're doing some different things. It really feels like Sanderson is addressing religion, specifically his own religion, being a part of the Mormon Church. There are passages here, both that I read early on and that I've seen talked about and seen from later, where it just really feels like he's both kind of like coming out, and talking like, say, hey, I'm not okay with some parts of the religion, but also then kind of trying to justify still being a part of it, where it's, following the spirit, not the letter, that kind of thing. So there's a little bit more of that kind of personal talking, I would say. And Sanderson's always explored religion. It's actually one of the things I've always really enjoyed about his books, because I don't really like talking about religion in the real world, but I love the discussion of fantasy religions. So it's, again, though, where some of the things started feeling a little bit more personal, where he was like really injecting, what his own thoughts and opinions, which is not something that I've really seen come from Sanderson in the past. He's usually been really good about having it feel like the characters are the characters, but also there's the kind of forced representation. And I know this is sort of a sensitive topic to say. It's something that I think has been pointed out quite a lot with the mental health representation, where a lot of it feels forced, a lot of it feels over the top, it's not subtle, it's just really shoved at you, and not always in the most accurate ways. But also, we start to see things like LGBT, type of things here in the story, which,
again, it completely fine. I don't have any sort of issue with that. I don't have any sort of issue with the representation. But again, it feels like it's just kind of forced in. It's not something that's really been talked about, and characters and their sexuality has not been talked about really in the series for the most part. And that also just increases in this book. So it's things like that too, where it feels like the things aren't just being put in there because they're a part of the world. It feels like these elements are being put in there because Sanderson's trying to appeal to as broad a market as possible. And part of it is Sanderson already does appeal to a pretty broad market. Stormlight, especially Sanderson in general, Stormlight especially has become incredibly mainstream, where it's something that a lot of people know, even if they're not big fantasy readers. It's just that series that's kind of pulled in. And one of the things that has been there from the start with Stormlight is that it is a big epic fantasy that can appeal to masses because it's easy to read. There's a low bar to entry. It's the writing is pretty basic and easy to get into. It's not like the super elevated prose that sometimes people struggle with, and I think that's part of also again why it's gotten so popular. But as it's gotten more popular, it seems like, especially in this last book, the writing is much worse, and I think that if you analyze it, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time going and analyzing different passages, but if you just look at this writing, and again, I've read Way of Kings 3-4 times, I've read Words of Radiance 3 times I think, and I read Oathbringer multiple times. I read Rhythm War, so I've read them all, and it's the writing here has actually gotten a little bit worse. It's even more basic. It's just doesn't feel like it's again in that kind of like high fantasy or epic fantasy way. It just feels very like real world kind of thing, and it feels off and it feels different. And I think that's, for me, as a really big fantasy reader, that's one of the reasons why it gets to me. And even, I know there are plenty of people who are big fantasy readers, and I've talked in Discord to people too who really did love this. And again, totally okay. But it really stuck out to me really early on, that just the way this was written. Part of it too, I think the humor and the way that it's gotten more and more juvenile. And it's not even just with Lift. I know Lift has been a very controversial character. I think if the people who are big on Lift are probably going to really enjoy this book. But that kind of humor seems like it's not even just Lift anymore. It's everywhere. And the books also feel like they've gotten to the point where it feels more like it's for a little bit of a younger audience than being an adult epic fantasy. We feel like we've kind of started as adult epic fantasy and kind of gone down, where this is more like a YA type of market. And again, I think a lot of that is Sanderson's trying to appeal to the widest possible market. So he's gotten so big, so well known, so mainstream, that he wants to have all of these elements that are going to make people feel comfortable, have these things that people are going to want to see. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the problem is there's nobody to tell Sanderson to rein it in. And there's not going to be anybody to tell him to rein it in because he's too big. He's too popular. He makes too much money. And it doesn't really feel like there's anybody who's really editing anymore. Not to say that the parts I read were like full of typos, but it's just, it doesn't feel like Wind and Truth went through somebody being like, hey, this isn't consistent, or the way this is worded, this doesn't work. It feels like it's just Sanderson wrote what he wanted to write and nobody really questioned him. Or if they did, he said, no, I'm fine. This is what we're going to do. Now, even with the beta reading, it sounds like, and from seeing, I know Sanderson talked about how he tried out a lot of different endings. It sounds like from beta reading, some of the feedback was just like, no, I'm gonna just do it the way that I'm gonna do it. But he can, and there's nothing really wrong with that, because there's gonna be a lot of people who really do enjoy this. But I feel like the direction we're going, this has fundamentally changed from what we started with to where we've gotten to. And again, Sanderson is huge. He's going to just keep writing what he wants to write, and he's going to keep changing it, making it more broadly appealing, because that's kind of Sanderson, that's his market, and that always has been. And this is, again, I have been a big fan of Sanderson for a long time, so I'm not saying this to try to be negative or like to talk down anybody, but Sanderson's always been the author who appeals to the lowest common denominator. That's by design. He said many times that he wants to have the simple prose. He wants anybody to be able to pick up and read the books, and that's what he's doing. And now it's just on such a grander scale, because there's so many other people involved from outside of fantasy, that we're just really, really trying to make sure it has that broad appeal, which as a business decision, I think makes a lot of sense. And I completely get why he's going to do it. He's making money hand over fist. Even me, he got me for a hardcover and an audiobook already. So he's got my money as well. And there are going to be people who are going to continue reading the series no matter what. even if this kind of path continues. So it's one of those things that I don't know that there's really a solution here, but that's kind of the core thing for me, and where I don't know that I really have any interest in reading more of Stormlight. I may try to pick back up Wind and Truth at some point, but the book being so long, not really needing to be that long at all. Again, the books keep getting longer and keep feeling less and less like they need the length, because nobody really wants to tell Sanderson no, and he is just able to write what he wants, and he's making everybody involved enough money that nobody's going to tell him to stop. Which again, I understand, and from a business standpoint, it makes sense. If you have the golden goose, why would you say like, oh no, why don't you do things differently? And you don't want to do that. You're like, hey, just keep making us money. We're raking in money hand over fist. Why are we going to complain? And so, from the publisher standpoint, from the people involved, and I think a lot of it too is he's got his own team who's all of his stuff, and there's nobody who's really like objectively saying like, hey, maybe this doesn't work. So that's where I do think this is going to continue to get worse. Now, the interesting thing is, will this spill over into everything he's doing? Is this just Stormlight? And I think that's still kind of up in the air. Now, I know others as well, and I've been kind of in the same boat, but I feel like the kind of the magic hasn't always been there for newer Sanderson stuff. The kind of the golden age, the classic, his early work has been the stuff that's really stood out for me and stood the test of time for me on rereads as well. And so I do find myself a bit less excited for Sanderson. He's no longer like the automatically I'm going to buy and read everything that he writes kind of author, and so it's just one of those things that this may go into there, and it's for me, I don't know how interested I'm going to be in reading Cosmere stuff going forward, because I've just kind of found myself slowly falling out of love with the idea, and it's something that's been, even though I was higher on Rhythm of War than I think a lot of people, I do think it was probably my least favorite Stormlight book, but I still thought it was solid, and I had a lot less problems with it than some. But I just found myself not being super excited for Wind and Truth as it was getting closer and closer. I actually kind of forgot that it was coming out, and I was reading like 4 other things at the time, and then just starting it. And again, I have been told that like the humor kind of drops off after the first 300 pages, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, to be honest, and that we do get to bigger things happening, but from everyone I've talked to who has had issues but is still reading, everything I've heard about this, for me, justifies not picking it back up. So I'll have to see. I don't know if I will. It won't be for a while if I do, but that's kind of what I just wanted to talk about here, because, again, I think the big thing for me is the core heart and the core feel of this book series has changed between books 1 and 5. And in some ways, it's almost unrecognizable. In other ways, we're still doing some things the same. But for me, it just has really, really changed. And it's something that whenever something changes that drastically, you really can go one or two ways. You can, hey, I love everything about this, let's keep going. Or you are like, I don't like this, is kind of not for me. And that's kind of where I've landed on this. So I don't know, like I said, what the solution is, but that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here with what I see the issues, why I think we're going to keep seeing this continue to go on this way. I would love to hear your thoughts. Again, agree or disagree, because I've talked to lots of people. Everybody's kind of talking about this right now. I've talked to lots of people who completely disagree with me and are loving it. And I've talked to people who do agree with me and are having a lot of issues. So really interested to hear your thoughts on any of the things that I said in this video. So let me know in the comments. But that's really it for this one. So make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.